Okay, bless you. All right, so we're here with Derek and Naomi in this beautiful home on the eastern shores of the Big Island of Hawaii to talk about this rather remarkable story that we've recorded in this book called Manual for the Awakening Warrior, the Special Forces Secret Mind, Body, Spirit Training Program.
And it actually has a lot of roots in the Big Island. The program we did on the mainland and back in Massachusetts, actually. But the initial invitation came from a Gila boy, Bud Cook, that Joel will tell you more about the story, but how that invitation came. But there's also illustrations from Jim Channon from Hawaii, from Hawaii, where we live, who had inspired a lot of the visioning into this program. And we'll talk a bit about that, but I just wanted to establish that the book has ancestry on the Big Island.
Here in Aloha Land.
Yeah.
So we thought, as a kind of a bridge between the meditation and this story, to share a story from a mentor of ours named Paul Reps.
Anyone ever hear of Paul Reps? He was one of the first people in the West. He's a poet and a Zen practitioner. I wrote a book called Zen Flesh, Zen Bones back in the 50s, 60s, 50s probably. We're one of the first pioneers to bring a lot of the Zen teachings and teachers to the West. And we had the good fortune to meet and study with him.
We were with Paul one day. I had met him. I was setting up a conference in the ashram up in BC, and he was there, kind of yogi in residence. And it was a weird ashram. Yeah, it had kind of a vibe to it. And so we met and kind of recognized each other. And he gave me a copy of the Zen teachings of Huang Po. And he said, read this and then let's have tea every day. And then we can have something to talk about. Which was quite sweet. He was in his 80s. I was like 21, 22 at that point. And which was super sweet. So one day, Paul told me this story, and he talked about, he lived in Vancouver, BC, and he had caught a freighter to go to Japan on his way to Korea to meet a Korean Zen teacher there who he wanted to study with. And after this arduous freighter ride across the Pacific, and then getting to Japan, and then traveling across Japan, he gets to the place where he had to apply for his visa to go to Korea. And he goes in and he presents his passport and asks for a visa. And the fellow behind the counter said, I'm sorry, there's a war breaking out in Korea and I can't give you a visa to go there right now. And Reps had gone all this way and spent all this money and was rather upset as a Zen practitioner and aware of his upsetness. So
which makes it even more.
As Paul described it, he went over on the side in the waiting room there and he pulled out his thermos and he pulled out his cup and he put his cup down, he unscrewed his thermos and very mindfully he poured the tea and he saw the mist rising from the tea, the steam rising from the tea. And he proceeded to very mindfully
savor.
Drink a cup of tea. And then after he finished his tea, he wiped out his cup and he put his thermos back together and he put it back in his bag and he pulled out a piece of paper and he pulled out a pen and he wrote a haiku. And the haiku said, drinking a cup of tea or drinking a cup of green tea, I stopped the war. I stopped the war. Drinking a cup of green tea, I stopped the war. Drinking a cup of tea, listening to Amy Goodman, Heather Cox Richardson, Fox News, hearing the shitstorm of news that's going on. We drink a cup of tea and we can downregulate and stop the war. Okay.
And if you ever go to visit, it's a big, beautiful Zen center called Green Gulch in Marin, California. If you go into the cafeteria area there long enough, on a big, beautifully calligraphied, framed kind of ends with a big Enso circle of the green tea. It says, drinking a cup, maybe it said a bowl of green
Bowl of green
tea.
tea.
I stopped the war. And it's become like a very kind of quintessential teaching in the tradition. Yes. Okay, you want me to go there?
Yeah.
All right.
So, well, maybe. We're figuring out as we go.
I
So-
appreciate your description of in their very unique way.
So about 10
We do
years
jazz.
later, 8 or 10 years later, after this cup of tea, about the cup of tea with Paul, I get a call one day. We get a call. I got it initially, and then Michelle got involved. Pick up the phone at my office at the medical center, and Bud Cook from Hilo is there, and he says, "Hey, Wiz," as in wizard, how'd you like to design the ultimate warrior training program for the U.S. Army Green Berets? And that's kind of the story we want to share with you. So we have a question for you.
Okay, so we would like to invite you to pause for a few minutes, to just to consider if you had received that invitation, and if you had the opportunity to train, in this case, 2 elite special forces teams, who might someday possibly be in a position to start or potentially stop the next world war, what would you teach them? What would you feel would be important curriculum to design for that training, for these special forces teams? What's important?
And for anybody listening to this recording, keep in mind we're like on the edge of World War III right now with what's going on in the Middle East. We're about 12 days into, 3 weeks into the insanity of what's going on. So this is a very pertinent question.
Well, let's get a little sampling. Just popcorn. Just what do you feel would be important?
I teach them how to regulate and understand their own nervous system, and then how to observe the nervous systems of those around them and how to work with that.
Yeah. So how to self-regulate and then have enough empathic attunement that you could, have a pretty accurate read on what's going on in the field.
Expect them to follow orders, to be rational, to be calm, and that, to approach the other people with that knowledge, not as a weapon, but as like a tool to possibly connect.
Right on.
Beautiful. And that was a key component of our training. So you're hired, you're on the team.
What else would you teach them?
I 100% agree with that. And going on, the ability in a situation for them to be able to respond instead of react.
Yep.
I know so much of that is stimulus reaction, which has no consciousness in it. And whatever skills you could help them to be able to respond more consciously
Yeah.
as
Exactly.
opposed to immediate
Thank
reaction.
you. Great. You're on the team too. That was
So the,
very.
yeah. So increase the capacity to respond rather than
Through
react. Yeah.
awareness, yes.
Somehow teach consciousness of time, of the beginning of time and the end of time, where we are between.
Wow.
That whatever deciding right now who gets to live, who gets to die, whose life is worth more than others, who is connected, who's disconnected from their own self lineage, future generations.
Mm.
Just having a consciousness about time and timelessness.
Wow.
Perfect. Deep
to,
time.
to expand that deep time frame, to really appreciate what's really going on here and what's the significance and where did this come from? Where is this rippling to? And where is my place in that? Yeah, that's beautiful. What? Yeah, welcome to the team. Summer Joy.
Feeling into the child within and children that are wherever this war or possibility of war, of like relationship with the child within and also the children of the land, and just also connecting with the land. There's some way to like orient wherever, and this group where this, that there's a practice that anchors them to the earth and the nervous system, I think, of that inner child, like really tuning in, and the children.
Beautiful.
Yeah, just keep thinking of the children. And that place of connecting to the joy of the child. That what is the joy that's wanting to be generated in that moment with the group? To have that kind of intimacy, I think would eliminate a lot.
Yeah. So just for the video here, connecting with our own inner child and the sense of the joy of the raw joy of being alive, and a deeper connectedness not only to the land but the children of the land that you might be deployed into. And yeah.
What's our higher purpose in being here?
Yeah. Yeah. So dedication in the sense of we're generating some energy through whatever it is that we're engaged in. How would we like to ripple that back out into the world? What's the intention or the prayers behind that? It's beautiful.
Jody?
Keep listening.
Yeah.
Their own heart, their spirit, their energy, their light. Because they're usually working in team. It becomes so intimate of a team member. How can they intimacy?
Deep listening to themselves, their team, kind of a profound kind of intimacy that comes in being in high stakes situations where our lives depend on each other. So, yeah. Yeah. The voice of it. Beautiful. Thank you, Jody. Barry, did you have
Think of thought comes to me as whole, that the people who are in the conflict, that are involved in the conflict, to be able to sit with one another and listen and get in touch with their heart, not through arguing, counsel, where you really have to teach how to be able to listen, because I think that's one way that we can learn to listen. If somebody doesn't know, and maybe some of the people involved in the front lines don't really take time to stop and circle and listen to one another and get in touch with their heart. And their heart in that helpful.
Yeah. So to really be able to sit and circle with each other, with those we're in conflict with, listen from the heart, speak from the heart, and see if, sitting in a circle, listening and speaking from our hearts together, can we stop the war and take those billions and billions of dollars that we'd spend nuking each other to feed people and plant gardens and build a better world? Yeah. Can we talk of that? Yeah. All right. So
I'm just gonna
imagine
say,
that.
as we're listening to everyone's inputs in the context of the soldiers, just to also listen, back to deep listening, how do these skills and qualities apply for you too, especially in these perilous times, but in our lives as a whole, what of these might also be relevant for your life, be important for how you live and the relationships and the choices and decisions and how you respond rather than react to challenges. Right.
Yeah, thank you. In the UNESCO Charter, it says, since wars begin in the minds of men, it's in the minds of men that we need to erect the ramparts of peace. Since wars
It was written
arise
before
from
gender sensitive.
Yeah, but it's still kind of still accurate. Yeah. And Lao Tzu said, a person with outer courage dares to die. A person with outer courage dares to die. A person with inner courage dares to live. And what we found as we got deeper and deeper into writing this book, keep in mind, this is a story of a program that lit up as a potential in 1982 and then went online 85, 86. So we had sat with this story for a long time, kind of listening for if or when or how to tell the story. For many years, it was just classified. And then
We couldn't write it.
we couldn't. And then when it wasn't, and it never really was clear like how to tell the story and not trivialize it into 8 cool things to
How you too can be a
yeah, we just didn't want to do that. And then COVID came on and we looked at just how ill-equipped so many people were to just be with what was going on and to stay self-regulated and stay connected to sources of strength and have the courage to just sit in the fire of everything that was going on at that point. And a publisher had reached out to us again, and it was time to write the book. And what we really discovered in writing this is really about the special kind of courage it shows to show up, the special kind of courage it takes to really show up wholeheartedly for our lives with all the joys and all the sorrows, with all the light and all the dark. So
that's kind of the secret inner title of, the publisher had manual for the Awakening Warrior, and they really liked that. And we had given them a variety of titles, but we kept trying to push into a special kind of courage and play off the special forces and the special kind of courage that's required in these times. But they were like, maybe we could just call the introduction or have it a chapter heading. They were really into the title, so we went with it. But it pervades the book.
So let's just talk about, how did a program like this come about? I mean, it's like we did a book talk recently down at Basically Books in Hilo with Colonel Deb Lewis from Hilo, who's a really good friend and has seen her share of action. And Deb very astutely, as we got into talking about this, said, in the current command environment, the current command climate, there's not a whole lot of listening for this kind of training, as I think we can all well appreciate, with a certain amount of heartache. but there was listening for it when we did the program. I mean, they came to us and asked for it. So let's just take a little while to look at how did a program like this come to be? You know, at one level, the U.S. military, especially the U.S. Army, was just broken. There was the cover-ups around the My Lai massacre. There was just a lot of stuff that went on in the wars in Southeast Asia that was not good or wise or true or noble, and created a lot of carnage and a lot of sadness and grief and trauma. The Army was really in a lot of disarray. Just before we were invited to design this program, they had released the suicide wall report that said that at that point, more than twice as many men and women were committing suicide when they came back from war than died in combat. And the current stats are somewhere between 4 and 16 times more people committing suicide. I mean, there's fast suicide where you just, drive off a cliff or whatever and you're done. And then there's all the kinds of slow suicide that are going on that take place over many years and create a lot of sadness and trauma for many other people. So the Army's soul loss and disarray, the carnage of the war not being over when the guys came and gals came back. The USSR, the US, and China were putting millions and millions of dollars into PSYOPs research. Psychic phenomena behind the Iron Curtain.
Kind of in the race for
and psychotronic research. I remember a friend who was a subject in some of the studies that were going on at Stanford, who was really good with psychotronic stuff, kind of like changing the settings on electronic systems down the hall or across the country, or reaching
mind over matter,
reaching out with the mind through the larger body and creating changes in the same way that you might direct your awareness to your fingertips and dilate the blood vessels and let more blood flow and the hands warm up, just extending the mind out through the larger non-local body. And one of our friends who was involved with the research at Stanford at one point, who had really good results with his experimentation. At one point, they asked him to mess with some kind of electronic system on a nuclear sub out in the ocean someplace. And he realized he could do it. And he walked out of the lab that day and didn't come back. Said, I'm done. That's just, I'm not going to help. So there's millions of dollars going on in remote viewing, mind at a distance kinds of stuff. Having been involved in consciousness research in the laboratory myself since 1972, I've done a lot of this work, and there are operators whose minds reach out, and there are effects that we can measure, and they're temporarily correlated with each other, but we still don't understand how it gets from here to there. So we know that this stuff works, but we don't know how it works. It goes through some quantum domain or mind of God domain or whatever that you can't slap a sensor on and measure transmission. That can go forward and backward in time and all kinds of stuff like that. So a lot of research with that. And Jim Channon. Anybody here know Jim Channon? Lived in Hawaii for many years. We met Jim when he was still in the Army.
Still in uniform. He was Lieutenant Colonel.
Yeah. Jim was assigned to Task Force Delta, and the role of Task Force Delta was to find the absolutely best in the military and industrial complex to recreate and restore, if you will, the soul and the spirit and the effectiveness and the strength to the U.S. Army. And they brought together, many people within the military who were visionaries and many people outside of the military to just say, what's the best stuff we can gather from the human potential movement and from the science of consciousness and from flow states and peak performance. And we met Jim just before he left the Army, and we ended up starting a training and consulting firm together. That was in a sense, the vehicle by which the work that they had done within Task Force Delta could flow out into the world outside of the military. And Jim's body of work there was kind of codified in a document and in a mythos of evolutionary tactics, a manual for the 1st Earth Battalion. And what
Kind of an underground cult classic in the military. It's still available, online now.
Yeah.
And have any of you seen the film, The Hysteric Goats, right? So that's a satire on that, and Jim always said to us, satire is the highest form of compliment. He didn't mind it at all, but he was who played him?
Jeff Bridges was Jim
Right.
Channon in the movie, which was kind of a nutso movie and not really about our
We didn't do
program.
anything like that.
But it got a lot of people thinking. Yes. So Jim envisioned the military as the natural guard. The natural guard,
Right.
who, if there was
Right.
floods in Honolulu, the Army would be deployed there to get people out of there safely and do what they could to prop up the dam and make sure people were fed and that there was shelter. And the vision of evolutionary tactics in the 1st Earth Battalion was as an earth stewarding force with an ennobling mission that a lot of people in the military found quite compelling and exciting. And so there was this great kind of excitement of, well, maybe we could do that instead of like John Wayne goes to the River Kwai kind of mythos that so many people grew up with, in terms of our visions for military. Why not care for and malama and steward the earth? And
protect the natural resources and the people.
Curious, title.
Yes,
Was it 1st Earth Battalion or 1st Earth Battalion?
the 1st Earth Battalion.
Like there could be another Earth.
Like,
So for the 1st Earth.
I think the ambiguity is constructive. Okay. Yeah.
With the 1st Earth Battalion or
Yeah.
the 1st Earth
both.
Battalion?
Maybe it's a
All the-
preparation for a new Earth.
Yeah. All of the above. So it was at one of the Delta Task Force meetings that Bud Cook, who was Bud was a graduate student and a really close friend of mine in a master's program at Antioch University on studies in consciousness. And Bud was a ski instructor, a sports psychologist, Aikido instructor. And he really embodied a beautiful sense of Budo, of the kind of the martial arts, noble kind of spiritual warrior ethos. Bud really is an embodiment of that. And he was invited by Jim to go to one of these meetings with all these people and do an Aikido demonstration, talk about Budo. And after that demonstration, Bud was approached by some really brokenhearted military leaders who said, look, we need to change our military paradigm.
Training.
We don't know what to do. You seem to embody some qualities that we'd like to have more of. Can you help us with that? And Bud said, yeah, I could help you with that. And I know some people back in Seattle that I should talk to also, and let me see if I could get them involved. So then that led to Bud coming back and making the hey whiz, how would you like to design the Ultimate Warrior Training Program? To which I said, I think, what were you smoking there again? It was just, no, he says, no, this is really for real. And he described some of what was going on. I said, let me talk to Michelle. So one Yeah, one other thing that was at play in terms of what gave rise to the program was the Soviets, who were all over, like the best Olympians and the best training and peak performance. The Soviets were developing a special unit, just like on fire with all the human technology and psychic stuff and what have you. And that was kind of scary for the US, for the US, and the US realized, well, we'd better get our trip together and get some kind of like more vastly equipped teams together as well. So that was like a fifth element of what was inspiring.
From the compassion perspective, folks, they would know. Great. Yeah, it wasn't only for what Joel was just talking about with the Olympic athlete of the mind kind of aspect, but it was that compassionate, brokenhearted part of like, how have we failed our guys? We haven't prepared them for the unreasonable stress that they were, were thrown into and needed, and their families. Well, welcome. Come on. We need something more there. We don't know, and we don't know what it is. We don't know what's missing. We just know that there's a lot that's been missing because our guys haven't known how to turn the war off on the inside when they came back from the war, and how to manage that kind of incredible stress in a way that without turning themselves off, their own lives.
So good. Yeah.
So I think that
So
was the strongest motivation as we came into it.
Yeah, I mean, the sincerity of the military leaders who brought us in was a great humility, a great compassion, a great sense of
caring.
We don't know what to do, help us here. And it was quite beautiful. The man who was really at the helm of this was Colonel Ken Getty, who was like a blazing bodhisattva manifesting as a really kind of amazing colonel. And we'll tell some more stories about him as we go along.
The first Earth question kind of got me a little bit closer. I'm wondering what talk, if any, or connection through this process people made with all of our ancestors, kind of related to what I mentioned about time. That people disconnecting from land in the first place creates problems that we didn't have before. And so leaning on indigenous leaders, be it through here, like in the movement, of Mauna Kea protectors. Talks are in those organizing spaces. I've attended a little bit. There's always been a warrior archetype.
Yeah.
And it's always been connected with land and protecting people. Yeah. So losing that knowledge or ignoring that knowledge, rediscovering it, like the way that, Hawaiians rediscovered navigation without our modern technology and things like that, rediscovering ancient knowledge and wisdom. If there's been any talk about that sort of,
there were elements.
Yeah, and that was very much a part of, for Jim in the First Earth Battalion vision, very much. And it actually led Jim to move to Hawaii, and it's interesting because we all kind of came here around the same time. And for Bud growing up in Hawaii from a Hawaiian family, he carried that very strongly. So he could, but so it wasn't there before this program, and we introduced as much of it as we could. But it was a very important piece. It is a very important piece, absolutely.
Yeah.
Do you think that from that time until now, the consulting, including looking for knowledge and wisdom of indigenous leaders and wisdom and leadership, has increased or decreased at that level?
I'd say probably decreased.
In the military?
Yeah.
It's increased in the rest. I think it's just, it's diffusing in
but
a larger sense.
as we get deeper into this, you'll see we brought as much of this in. We had the blessings, we is leaping ahead a little bit here, but we had between the time we submitted our proposal to going live on base, we had almost 3 years. And during that time, we reached out to dozens of our indigenous teachers and our spiritual teachers and our research buddies, and basically saying, if you had a chance to train 25 people who might start or stop the next world war, what would you teach them? And you can imagine the downloads we got from teachers from different lineages and different traditions, and just, what a medicine bundle of really blessed, sacred, deep teachings that we carried into this to share as best we could. So we'll talk a little bit more about that. So I came home the evening that I got the, hey Wiz, how'd you like to design this program call, and presented the notion to Michelle. Hey dear, I got a call from Bud today. The last time Bud had called, it was, hey, how'd you like to go train the Seattle Mariners on a sailboat in the Bahamas for the winter time? It was just kind of like, so she said, oh, so what was Bud thinking about this time? I said, oh yeah, the Ultimate Warrior Training Program for the Special Forces. Would you like to play? It's like, and we started, just contemplating, what would this mean? It's just as two rather outspoken peaceniks ourselves, with, who had never stepped across those thresholds into the military, thinking, this is quite a radical idea for us to offer or participate in the program.
It was not only design, but deliver. So it would require us to be full-time on base for 6 months with these guys. They pulled no other duty, and they were ours 24/7. And of course we had to, part of it, make sure they kept up with some of their mission skills, but it was all within the context of, mindfulness and awareness and consciousness and presence in different ways. But anyway, I was going to mention Trident. Did you?
Yeah, Trident and Call.
Yeah,
go for it.
So in the part of the context, as Joel and I were considering, what do, yes, no, do we accept this? Do we jump in? How could we be of benefit? And Trident submarine was just that week coming into, we were in Seattle at the time, to Puget Sound, with the largest arsenal of nuclear warheads on each submarine that had been, and I think up until that time, it was the largest nuclear arsenal. And most of our friends were out in their kayaks. You probably remember that time, maybe. They lived very close to the Trident base on Whidbey Island, another island. And we were contemplating, like, wow, what if we had the opportunity to go work with the crew of a Trident submarine and teach some of these skills that you all brought forward, and could help them self-regulate and not be as reactive, but really have more presence and have a sense of deep time in making decisions and all of that. Yeah, we'd feel safer. The world would likely be safer. And we thought, maybe we should consider this. And then one of our close Tibetan teachers who had been studying who had been in Vancouver.
Can I make one point before you go there?
Please.
And one thing that came to mind on the Trident conversation and contemplation was thinking about during the Cuban Missile Crisis. There's a Wikipedia page titled "The Man Who Saved the World," and there was a vice admiral in the Soviet Navy who had been ordered to fire nuclear torpedoes during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and he refused to follow the order and not put his key in the lock and open that up. Vasily Archipov. And I get chicken skin, just talking about that. And just the fact that one person was able to self-regulate enough in that situation and suffer for the rest of his life in terms of consequences of that decision. But he stopped the world from going into a nuclear war by saying, no, I'm not going to follow that order.
Let's look at some other options.
So in recognizing that, recognizing the gravity of what we were being asked to do, there was a place in that there was enough of a kick in the ass to both of us as peace protesters and to seriously consider this. And
a beloved, venerable elder, Tibetan teacher that we had just been studying with together in Vancouver and had just left to go down to Portland to give some teachings. We said, well, let's ask Kalu Rinpoche. Let's see what he thinks, If he says, no, that would be bad karma, don't touch it. We'll just, heed his wise advice. But maybe he has a different perspective on it. So we had the number of his translator and we called him, and Chicky answered, and we explained the situation. And we said, would you please just ask Kalu, would you please ask Rinpoche, it means precious one in Tibetan. A lot of teachers have that last name. It's just like the Pawilo Rinpoche, the precious one from Pawilo, just kind of the precious one from where they live. And ask Rinpoche what he thinks about this. And Chicky went off and came, and we're like butterflies in the stomach, waiting for him to come back. And he comes back and he's all excited and he says, oh, Rinpoche thinks this is a really great idea. If you, and we're like, if you have the opportunity to work with people who have a lot of power and may lack the wisdom, compassion, the balance of wisdom and compassion to use that power in the wisest way and the most beneficial way, and you can do anything to show other options and to help open perspectives for them, you absolutely you must. And I rely upon you for the success of this program. I was like, okay. So it's kind of a very clear mandate to do your best, do what you can. And so we did.
Yeah, and Kalu Rinpoche was the first of probably dozens of spiritual teachers and wise men and women that we sought counsel from, and not one of them said, no way, bad karma, run, because everybody said, wow, that's an incredible opportunity.
Please.
And we kind of went in, with an attitude ourselves, just here we all are, shipwrecked in samsara, trying to find our way home, stormy seas, scary world, a lot of danger. Here are some skills that may help, and a safe space to just talk together about what it's like to be in your life and in your world. So there was a lot of counsel and a lot of deep reflection. So we called Bud and said, okay, let's see what this might look like. Bud came over. We spent an afternoon and filled up quite a few napkins and took them to Mom, who was our admin for our little ragtag consulting firm that was the business face of the First Earth Battalion, that had an office at the back of the Magic Mouse toy store in Seattle. So to get to our corporate office, you had to walk through all the yapping little dogs and up a few steps on the other side into this little room with two, like right around the corner from Sid's place, And we took our napkins down to Mom, who was this retired, I think, the mother of Bud's girlfriend. And she typed it up all nice and neat. We put it in a FedEx envelope, and the FedEx guy came in through the yapping dogs and walked out with us and took it to the Pentagon,
And one little additional piece for here. We decided if we're gonna make this proposal, submit this proposal, since the Army said they didn't know what to do, please tell us what you think is important. Let's just go for the gold. Let's make the, the most holistic program that we could come up with. What would be the optimal? We didn't even know what the budget would be, except it sounded like it was a pretty blank check. Just tell us what you need. So we just didn't, hold back. We really, it was amazing, including work with their families, dietary, just very holistic. What would give these guys the greatest balance of mind and body and heart? So we just really wrote a very comprehensive proposal. And we said, well, we'll see if they like it or not. And if we need to trim some stuff later, but let's give it our best. So that was the proposal that went out.
So part of what it was, keep up with soldier skills that they needed to stay current on. Part of it was bringing in the mythos and the vision, the creative ennobling vision of evolutionary tactics in the manual of the 1st Earth Battalion, this sense of being Earth stewards and the ennobling mission they had to protect life and protect planet as part of the mythos of it. We brought in Aikido as a martial art, which was a very different kind of martial art than those guys had ever learned. It was about deep empathy and reading flows of energy and harmonizing
and redirecting,
blending with those, and watching these guys on the mat for the first couple of weeks, just trying to figure out, how does this work? They were really awkward, and once they caught that wave, it was like cowabunga. These brothers really got into the Aikido, and then that brought in the Budo and the kind of indigenous and spiritual training of the kind of spiritual warrior kind of archetype. We took them on a month-long silent meditation retreat,
which we didn't call a retreat because that doesn't have a good connotation in the military. We called it an encampment.
Encampment.
It worked.
Yeah, and that was designed with one of our teachers, Rina Sarkar, who had been a Burmese Buddhist nun since she was 4 years old, and was really a remarkable teacher. And her teacher was National Treasure of Burma, named Tangpulu Sayadaw, and the two of them had worked with the Burmese army back, before it had gone really, really dark in trying to fend off the British. And they had taught meditation to them, so they helped us design the protocols for that. Plus, we had a lab with about $500,000 worth of biofeedback and neurofeedback equipment, teaching the men to just self-regulate everything you could attach a sensor to and give a signal back. So, and working with their families and their diet and re-engineering their physical training, which was kind of like gladiator training when we came in. It didn't have much sophistication at all.
Didn't have warm up and cool down.
Incredibly
power out,
holistic design. So we sent the proposal off. About a month later, we get a response from logisticians at West Point saying, "This is the most exquisite orchestration of human technology we have ever seen. Let's do it."
They went for the whole proposal.
Yeah. And George Leonard and Michael Murphy,
Founders of
Esalen and the Human Potential Movement, were really beloved older brothers on this journey and advisors. And they said, this is the most advanced and intensive leadership development program that the world's ever seen in modern times. So it had some potency to what this seemed to hold in terms of potential. So in preparation, we our team, sans Michelle, the guys went back to they said
I was the only woman on the team.
Yeah,
no,
there weren't. It was all guys.
It was all guys, and the representatives of.
Yeah.
Yeah,
was-
I could have used a few
Like
sisters.
green Tara goes to the Green Beret. You know? But yeah, one of the thresholds we had to cross was they said, okay, you look good on paper. Send your team back so our teams can check them out. We'll take you to play some of our games and see if you can keep up with us. So some of us went out. The first day we did some rock climbing and we kind of aced it. And then that night we drove up to Portland, Maine Harbor. And if any of you watch Heather Cox Richardson, on the wall behind her, she has a map with Portland, Maine Harbor on it. And if you zoom in on it, you can see the place where we put in at
The harbor.
yeah, we were all in wetsuits. And we swam across the harbor at
And
night.
didn't you all buckle together?
Yeah, kind of in this chain gang of guys out dodging freighters crossing
night.
the harbor at night. And we did pretty well with that too. And then they said, okay, we'll work with you. You know? So we get
Took
we
me
get
on
this-
faith that.
yeah, they just
Okay, too.
yeah, if you want to bring a woman trainer and she's got something to deliver, that's great. You know, so. But then the next day, we were back at Fort Devens outside of Boston, and they kind of they opened the kimono to show us what their mission really was. And we're in this building that had ceilings about twice as tall as this, and these big drapes on the walls. It was before there were digital monitors. And they pull on the drapes, and there's these maps of Eastern Europe, you know, like Ukraine and all the stands and all that. And they said, this is our field of operations. And the mission for the guys that you'll be training will be that they would be flown way deep in the thousands of miles in enemy territory, dropped in the middle of the night, fall till the treetops and open their chutes, find whoever survived the jump on their team, get it together, stay alive as long as they could, and get out as much intelligence as they could, because there weren't a lot of satellites in the sky at that point. You know, there were like 200-300 satellites in the sky at that point. There's
Compared to what's now.
35,000 now, I think. And that they weren't expected to come out alive. And one of the guys on our team said, Colonel Getty, is what you're saying that our real job is to prepare these guys for a suicide mission? And Ken got so fierce at that point. And he said, no, your job is to do everything you can to increase their chances of getting out alive. And that was like one of those soul quivering moments, you know, just that's what we were there to do, you know, was to teach them that. But part of what they were going in there to do was not only to get out information, but was to find people within those communities that would ally with them and help build resistance and kind of, you know, they needed to be able to be sensitive to culture and people and befriend folks and be kind and build alliances and not just they weren't going in to blow things up. They were going in to get information out and to build relationship wherever possible. Yeah, they did. And in fact, I'll just jump ahead for a moment. After the program, a bunch of our guys went into East Berlin with Colonel Getty, who was running special ops in Europe after when the Berlin Wall was still up. And a bunch of our guys went into East Berlin and had mustaches and cool clothes and were hanging out in the coffee shops and kind of doing clandestine stuff on the sides.
When the wall came down.
And they were operative in Eastern Europe when the wall came down. So did they have anything to do with that? I don't know, but
Not unlike.
not unlikely. Yeah.
You know, just to also help you understand the level of stress besides the mission, when they could just get the notice that they were being deployed, like that day or that morning get ready to go, and they couldn't tell their families, you know, where they were going. Their families did not know what was behind the curtain, you know, and they had no ways of staying in touch. Or so just imagine, you know, the intensity of that. You know, you just disappear, leave your family, and they don't know where you are. And yeah, so that was part of why we wanted to help the families understand and not have any kind of trepidation about what kind of training we were doing with them. And so we, you know, we had family night, got everybody hooked up to the biofeedback, and you know, no, we're not going to give them LSD and make them, you know, there was all these other things that had been going on with all kinds of psychotropic drugs
MK Ultra and
before
some of those
this
dark
program, which was
programs.
very dark. And
previous.
so just to allay some of that stress and anxiety for the families, it's very touching. Are you up to that already?
So,
All right. 3 years hopping along. All right. So we got the green light go ahead. We were on. We had the contract, and then our folks in the Army contracting office said, but you have to be patient because it has to go through all the red tape till we can actually be on base. And so it turned out that we had a bunch of time to really plan and meet with mentors and do a lot of our own contemplation and research. And it was really a rich time of preparation. And we sought out the people who we really respected, their wisdom and their insight on, both as martial artists, but also as, you know, if you were going to do a silent 1 month encampment, where did we get that idea from? Well, we felt we really wanted to drop them in deep. And as it turned out, to develop a whole nother level of courage. They had that outer courage that Lao Tzu was talking about, dare to die, you know, jumping out of those airplanes at the helicopters at night or wherever, you know, and not opening their chutes so they were really low, close to the ground, and that kind of thing. They had that. But that inner courage to be with their own minds, in silence. Well, you know, that was a whole nother level that they had never had any kind of training for. So another one of our teachers, like Kala Rinpoche, also a Tibetan teacher that we were very close with, happened to be in California. That's my memory. He was in the mainland. I think Joel thinks he was in Seattle, but he was on the West Coast. And we went to see him, and Zong Rinpoche, the precious one from Zong. And we described the program to him, and at our invitation, he also, you know, thought that was a great opportunity. And we said, so Rinpoche, what would you teach them? We asked him the same question that we asked you at the beginning. What do you think is important, you know? And he didn't speak English, so we got this through a translator who was with us, Tibetan translator. And he said, Rinpoche says, teach them courage. And we were like, and that's all he said. He didn't comment and develop on it, teach them courage. And we're like, Joel and Michelle are going to teach the Green Berets courage, right? We're thinking in terms of outer courage at that time, you know. It's like, wonder what he means. And it was like a koan, you know, with us through the whole program. You know, what kind of courage is he thinking that we can teach them? And we started getting more and more glimpses. And interestingly enough, as we met other Tibetan translators down the road, they said, oh, that word that was translated in Tibetan, that was translated as courage, was one of the translations, but like literally it meant heart power, meaning top, heart power. It could have been translated as compassion. It could have been translated as forgiveness, as patience, you know, just different qualities of heart power, of a powerful heart. And so it's kind of like we kept finding other levels, but also discovering, like, for example, one of the biggest things that we found was we had asked for, actually be kind of on a non-negotiable term in our design. We want people who are volunteering for this program, because it's not an outward physical training that you can see if the soldier is giving you 20 push-ups, you know, you can see what they're doing. This is inner work, and we want people who want to be doing this, volunteering and want to learn these trainings. But when we got on base, they had picked two teams, right? Because these guys work in teams and they go from as teams, and they're not as individuals there. So they picked out two teams, and we had the whole bell curve in that team. But the guys, most of them, if not all of them, really had no idea what kind of training they were being deployed into. They did not. We're not given, this is the menu, what you'll be doing. Do you want to play?
And we had prepared like we were teaching a university class, and everybody was going to show up early for the first class, having read all the books, and we're totally excited and would stay up all night studying, and they come in and they couldn't be more stoked. And these guys are saying,
Scratching
what's
their-
this all about?
Well,
It's like,
explicative.
it's just like,
Like all
and
told.
and so for the first week or two, we get home from a day at the base just going, we've got to re-engineer this whole program. It's just like, so that was just traumatic for us.
And there were a few guys, because of the bell curve nature, who were like a kid in a candy shop, like, I can't believe the Army's giving me this opportunity to learn all this stuff. And there were a few that were really excited. And we learned a lot about leadership dynamics and how that affects a whole team, because of the two teams. One of the team leaders was a recently graduated West Point captain, who was one of the ones who was like really excited to learn about this. And the other team leader was one of the like really resistant, like, what are we doing this crap for? We should be out doing blah, 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 and was not at all excited. And to see the level, and the guys in the team themselves were equally skilled and for equal capacity. They could have cross-trained easily from one team to the next. They had equal, capability. But the team who had the leader who was really into it outperformed the other team, both and even how their brains were showing up on the neurofeedback. And it's just like amazing to see that. And in fact, we had we designed a neurofeedback system to train whole teams together to sync up to attune, with each other, and a system that hasn't existed before. So
imagine 12 guys synchronizing their brain waves in the states of really deep resonance and empathy with each other.
And calm, awakeness and presence. So he came out at one point, the Dr. Jim, who came out to help design the system that we're using. And we were showing him kind of some of the records and what we were doing. And he's comparing 062 and 065, and he's going, the Alpha team and the Bravo team. And he's like, oh, I get it. This team's on drugs, right? And it was the team that was, where their brains just weren't at full capacity. And it's like, no, no drugs. It's really a lot of the attitudes, I believe. And that really was very insightful, because up until that point, we had been doing more work in healthcare. We hadn't been working out doing leadership development and team building in organizations, which we started doing after that program. But that was very insightful, the transpersonal effect, without even saying anything in this case. The team leader said plenty, but just how crucial the attitudes, the inner attitude of leaders are. Yeah, if you guys need to stretch or get, we'll just keep rolling along here, but please get water. So that was Zong Rinpoche. Yeah.
Skip the axioms just to brief pop on that.
Lab.
Focus on the retreat.
Yes.
Okay. So imagine, with the lab, not only synchronizing brainwaves, but imagine, just as a training scenario, bunch of tough Green Berets coming in, you hook them up to a little finger sensor that measures skin temperature. And the skin temperature is reflective of the blood flow to the fingertip. And the blood flow is amount of blood that's coming to the fingertip depends on whether the blood vessels are constricted or they're dilated. And
if they're dilated, what do you think, how would you think that would affect their skin temperature versus constricted? Warmer. Yeah.
so imagine you're hooked up to a biofeedback instrument that measures like changes of 100th of a degree. And you're trying to find the inner calibration and skill and quality of attention that is going to allow those little blood vessel muscles to relax, the blood vessels dilate, the hands get warmer. The warmer your hands get, the faster your little race car goes. And you're competing with other guys to see who can win the race by relaxing the most. Yeah.
Instead of tensing.
And the harder you try, the not even the slower,
It
the
stops.
softer you are, you know? So it's like, so you've got all these guys sitting there just kind of like, I can muscle my way through anything and make anything happen in a very young kind of way. And this is a totally yin kind of move I'm trying to learn, you know. So they had that end of the control spectrum down of like grit your teeth, power through, recover later, down really good. But the kind of like let go and find more power in receptivity and openness and allowing with intention was really not on the radar for them. And we're using the technology to kind of help them find that, you know. So that's just a little glimpse of just how cool the tech is. But
as you entered our lab, you're coming down the hall. We got there and nothing was prepared. We had to create, you know, all the lab, paint the barracks, put everything, you know.
It was all supposed to be built out before we got there, you know.
It's crazy. But anyway, so we got it together, and you're walking down the hall towards the lab, and then you open the door, and the first thing you see on the wall, we had put a big mirror.
A biofeedback device.
Which is a biofeedback device, because it gives you information about, you know, when you smile, you see that face smiling and scout. So it said, caution, entering mind field. Okay, we're entering a different kind of world.
We're not at Guantanamo anymore, Dorothy. You know, it's like, yeah. Encampment?
Yeah.
Okay. So as the month-long silent meditation retreat arrived, more and more guys were coming up to us on the sly and saying, I'm gonna go fucking bonkers on you if I have to sit with my own mind.
They didn't say bonkers.
Yeah, nuts. They were scared. A lot of the guys were really scared of having to sit with themselves in silence for a month.
With their own, and with it just
as you can imagine. And we said, well, would you like to learn at a really lovely secluded Boy Scout camp in New Hampshire? Or would you like to be dug into a hillside with a bunch of hostiles looking for you with snow falling in a totally scary place where your life's in danger? Would you like to learn how to do this in New Hampshire or wait till you get there? Yeah. So we took them on the encampment. And the first couple of weeks.
That was another sign of the teach them courage. Teach them to, because that was out of the comfort zone. Absolutely. You know, with my own mind, without distraction, without talking or, you know, drinking or just getting out away. So, I haven't developed that courage yet, but they did.
So, you know, one of the practices that we taught, and this kind of comes back to ancestors a bit, if you will, and maybe we'll just do this for a moment. Maybe just reach up, touch your heart. Just feel yourself sitting here as the being that you are, replete with all the joys and sorrows and the potentials that have been realized and haven't been realized, and the vulnerabilities and the strengths that you have. And imagine, you know, just like with a phone, you know, it's a fun little widget, but if it's not logged onto the network or the cloud, it can't really do a whole lot. Okay, so in that kind of spirit, imagine yourself facing one of the challenges that are present in your life at this time or in the future. And then call in and see who comes to mind: an ally, a source of strength or guidance, a teacher or an ancestor or an archetype who may be a source of strength and inspiration for you. And call them close enough to you that you can actually reach out with a hand now and hold their hand. Actually do that. Reach out, hold their hand. And as you reach out, you hold their hand, imagine you can breathe in their mana, their strength, their wisdom, their love, and you can breathe back your gratitude, your love, and your thanks to them. So as you breathe in, you receive and you gather that. You radiate and extend your love and gratitude back to them. And then imagine them reaching out and holding the hands of their teachers. And imagine them reaching out and holding the hands of their teachers in an infinite cascade back through the lineages and the ancestors. So that as you breathe in, envision just waves of strength and grace and guidance and inspiration and blessings flowing to you, and your love, your thanksgiving, your light flowing back upstream to all of them. So each breath is in this gesture of receiving and of radiating. And as you receive, imagine now that you can open your heart to emanate some of this light, this strength, this mana to others who may face similar challenges, or loved ones who need some strength or some support or some outriggers on their canoe. And that they're touched and they're bathed in this light and this love and this strength, and that their love and their gratitude flows back to you and lifts your spirits, opens your heart, and you give even more to them. It's a cycle of reciprocity, receiving, radiating together. And then just imagine the ripples of this extending infinitely through time and space and generations, upstream, downstream. And sense how different this way of constellating yourself is from where you maybe started from, as just an isolated node without outriggers on your canoe, without deep grounding in lineage or ancestors or sources of strength, thinking that, oh, I don't have the resources I need to feel this challenge because I'm all by myself. And here you are, just busting that open to find strength and reservoirs that you can draw from. Yeah. So it's like, yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will probably fear some evil, but I will trust that I have access to some of the strength and the resources I need to kind of find my way through this, and that I'm not walking through alone. So this is one of the kinds of practices that we shared with these guys going into this retreat, just as a way to kind of drop deeper anchor, find a deeper kind of grounding and strength and perspective, a vaster sense of deep time, as we were talking about it. But then a lot of the time in the retreat was kind of like in that mudra of the Buddha, where, with one hand, he's reaching down and touching the earth, or touching the ground of that clear, open, birthless, deathless, timeless awareness. And the other hand kind of cupped at your lap, like you're holding an alms bowl and receiving whatever the universe may offer you in any given moment. And all the joys, all the sorrows, all the hopes, all the fears, just sitting through the fire of that, hour by hour and day by day and step by step, and for a month in silence together, just saying, bring it on, show me everything that's here in the bundle, so I can open my heart, open my eyes, open my mind to this. And let that open my heart to compassion for myself and compassion for other people who have similar wounds or traumas or hopes or fears or vulnerabilities. And, you know, then opening the heart through practices of loving kindness and metta and karuna, you know, shining the light of our loving kindness out as beacons into the world. So it was a juicy month, so to speak.
One more story from the encampment for now. One day I had taught the loving kindness practice, metta meditation, starting with, you know, for some people it comes a little later to find that love and care, wish for oneself to be well, you know, but you know, and to open our hearts to forgiveness to ourselves so that we can open our hearts to forgiveness to others. And that whole, it's a beautiful practice of loving kindness. And I had taught that in the towards the last one of the later sessions of the day. And then we had, like, for the really tough mind warrior, heart warriors, heart power warriors, we had an optional late night session to come back after the formal training was done for the day for a longer sit in going deeper in whatever practice we had done that day. And that night, actually, probably the most number of guys came back for the optional late night sit. And it was dark and a little lamp, what they kerosene lamps? They were kerosene lamps, you know, just flickering light in our little zendo that we created. And the guy, we had created this altar. Everybody put something that was meaningful to them and important, sacred for them on that altar. So we created that sacred space, and we invited them to just continue with the loving kindness practice. And at one point, Joel and I were just kind of scanning, and there was one soldier kind of right in front of us, a really skilled martial artist. He was one of the few vets from Vietnam War time in the group. And he was wearing a Rangers black t-shirt, Rangers skull and crossbones t-shirt, Rangers death from above t-shirt. And he's doing this loving kindness practice. And there are tears rolling, streaming down his cheeks, falling on the skull and crossbones, you know. And both of us, you know, we both talked about, after having had that same like tilt, you know, like it didn't compute the visual and the energetic and healing. But as it turned out, that soldier, and he was one of the better, you know, had really good form sitting, and just an amazing guy, had seen a lot of action. And at the end of the encampment, I'm going ahead a little bit here quickly, but the Army put these guys through this intense gut check. They called it like an endurance test to see, well, any of this kind of inner training, how does, you know, are they stronger from it? Are they weaker out of coming after this month? And after the month of the encampment. And they put them through this, like, one grueling test after another, heartbreak hill, like, you know, you finally make it to the top of this really steep mountain, and you think you're at the top, and it's just the beginning of the next, you know. And the guys, the teams had to all be at the same point at the allotted time when food was going to be dropped in. They all had to be there or they didn't get food. And no other teams had ever made it successfully as teams through, without injuries, without fighting, without, you know, internal division happening. Our guys were the first two teams to successfully ever make it in one piece and in one heart through that. And we were talking with them after, and I was speaking to this particular soldier, called him Chief. Chief, so what kept you going, you know, through this like incredible endurance test, you know, one grueling feat after another? He said, well, you know, it was that heart thing you taught me. I was like, the heart thing? Yeah, you know, I just knew that, oh, it's really hard. I'm hurting, and oh, my buddies behind me, they're also having a hard time. Their feet are hurting, their backs are hurting. They carry these like immensely heavy packs, like 90 pounds or so, 90, 100-pound packs, which so they didn't need on that, but they had to carry it because in case they were being tested for this endurance. And he said, my buddies are hurting. And so I just kept sending, may I be strong. May I make it up this hill. May you be strong. And he was just sending it back to all the buddies. And that gave me strength. That gave me like renewed power to do it. It was that hard thing. Wow, that was so special that they carried that through. So many special
yeah,
stories.
there's so much that could be shared. I think just to begin to wrap it, at the end of the program, we had collected thousands of dollars worth and pages worth of data. But the most significant feedback that we got on the program was the comments and the letters from the guys' wives and their girlfriends and their kids.
Yeah, letters from,
which were really, really touching, about
Thank
the transformations that they had witnessed and
I
their
have a dad
gratitude to us for
again.
that.
Doesn't just come home and knock me around
So
the house.
that was super
Oh,
significant. And
this
one of the teams went on to be selected as the most outstanding team in the NATO games that year. I mentioned the guys who went into Eastern Europe with Colonel Getty during the time that the wall came down. Did they play a role in that? I don't know. A lot of them went on to be trainers for other groups here and there and diffuse what they had learned. We get calls from one guy in particular now and then saying, hey, I'm in Emirates and I'm training special ops soldiers here and I'm trying to teach them that meditation. And after you do this and this, then am I right? Is this comes next? And the same guy, at one point, we picked up the phone. We were at our place in Seattle, and it's just like the phone rings, and he says, "Hey, this is me. I'm not going to mention his name because we're recording. I'm in Port Townsend with my family, and we're coming through Seattle tonight. Can we come visit?
And he was
I'd like you to meet my wife and my kids." And they come over, and we just laughed and cried for about 3 hours as he described to us what he had learned. And this is one of the most like in your face young guys on the teams. I mean, he really just was a case, but he got a lot of it, and he carried it in a good way. And he said, I really want to apologize for just how unkind I was to you guys. But I really also want you to understand, just how this stuff saved my life and saved my missions and saved my marriage,
saved my sanity.
My sanity. And he was one of those guys, dug in to a mountainside in Iraq, like for 3 weeks before the rest of the troops came in. The day that the shock and awe or whatever that was when we lit up Iraq, he was told that it was going to go nuclear and that he should just dig in as deep as he could. And, maybe he'd survive. So we talked about how he had, So on it goes, a second program was approved, but Colonel Ken went on to War College and then to Europe. The guy who got the appropriation of funds says, I'm not going to do any of that kind of training on my watch, and so there wasn't a second program, which in many ways we're grateful for. This was enough. But what we did was sort of a bunker buster for the military mindset and culture, and probably millions of people in the US military and other militaries around the world have been able to receive training, in mindfulness and deep resilience and positive psychology and biofeedback and neurofeedback.
Maybe not as in depth or for as long, but we got something that they wouldn't have gotten for shorter, maybe 8-week training type things, or
Yeah, it was kind of proof of concept to open the floodgates for that kind of work to be more widely available. We were invited into British Parliament at one point. We were advisors on their Mindful Nation report at Parliament. And they sponsored a special day of talking about the vital role of mindfulness for military and blue light emergency services. And there were all these people, we were just a tiny minority in that group. Most of these people had suffered so much stress and trauma and burnout, and
firemen, police,
yeah, and
emergency workers.
they talked about just the incredible value of learning mindfulness and self-regulation skills, and how important it was to share this with the whole departments or the whole divisions or what have you. And we were invited to speak about this program there. So, and there are international conferences that have been going on. I don't know in the current environment if they are, but international conferences with military leaders from 20, 30 nations coming together to talk about can we afford not to provide this kind of training for the men and women that we send into harm's way. So there's like a big international movement around this. So.
When we were at Parliament, we had this whole great slideshow, PowerPoint prepared, ready to show. And we get there and all the AVs down. And it just wasn't working for all the presenters were going a little nuts. And then we're like, okay, we're just going to have to wing it. And we couldn't even really talk about it because it was starting right then. And we found out that it wasn't happening. And for like even shooting each other like looks, and then the moderator, we were kind of coming up onto the being called up, and the moderator, I guess he was a minister, one of the PMs there. He said, "Okay," because this was the Jedi Warrior Program. The guys had named it the Jedi Warrior Program. That was the soldiers' name. That wasn't on the original contract. They said, "Okay, and now we have a special treat for you. We have Obi-Wan and Princess Leia."
This is the British Parliament. We're kind of looking at each other going, they're here? Oh, it's us.
Joe pulled a brilliant rabbit out of his hat and kind of did, similar to asking you that question at the beginning. It's like, okay, congratulations, you all just completed the training, and we kind of just inducted them into our First Earth Battalion.
Remembering what we did
kind of group memory. What did we do? And so we just kind of enacted it. It was powerful and dramatic to be called up. And also, when Colonel Getty was about to retire, and we went to thank him. Part of this book was because he asked us, besides, Bud had asked us to come and do this program, and with Jim's support. But part of the writing of the book was that Colonel Getty, when we were leaving, he said, "I want you to tell the story of this program," And a number of the soldiers also said, "We want you to tell it. We want to hear it from your perspective." And so we kind of felt we had a mandate from these people that we really had grown to love and respect. And it, besides everything we talked about, it was it was the most powerful peace work we had ever done, beyond any kind of demonstrations or that we'd ever attended. It was meeting these two cultures that for them, we were strange birds in their nest, and they were definitely strange birds in our nest. And we recognized and respected that we each had a lot to teach each other and to learn from that. So it was kind of going beyond our preconceptions and prejudgments about each other, because it was clear. And we had made, of course, this promise to each other to be absolutely ourselves and honest and authentic, and not pretend, that we hadn't been in the military or whatever, to be ourselves. And they respected that. And it was just some really, really powerful meeting of the minds moment. Yeah, John.
Given that you were the only woman,
Yeah.
that difference,
Mm.
how did that show up how did that amongst the group as a whole, you know, was there a feminine perspective that you came to see them?
Yes. Yeah, I couldn't have planned for a lot of what came up, you know, but it was actually powerful learning because, you know, we had our team leader was a Marine. The Aikido sensei was also from the Marines. The Marines and the Army have a lot of competition between them. We were so naive that we didn't realize that when we put our team together. Yeah, thank you. And so there was a lot of kind of macho jockeying between the guys that I wasn't like involved with some of the like who's tougher than who. And what turned out, I think a part of that special kind of courage was that they were more comfortable coming to talk to me about what they were feeling and to be vulnerable in ways that they weren't as comfortable to show those weaknesses or those fears or those, you know, and so I was able to, I had a big advantage to just connect with them on that, you know, emotional heart level and for them to be heard and also to give guidance and practices and all that level, but just to have a friend that they could come and say, Michelle, I don't know what's going on, but I've never felt like this before. I'm always either or up or down, you know, and I feel so even. You know, and am I sick? Is there something wrong? And I'm like, no, this is in the meditation month encampment, you know, it's like, no, nothing, nothing wrong, you know, and just your learning skills to be more balanced. Plus the diet, you know, in the encampment was very balanced. And he was just feeling different than he'd ever felt, but he wouldn't have been, that's just an example. You know, he could come up and many of them could come up and talk to me about stuff that they wouldn't have brought up in the whole group. And I didn't anticipate that.
Yeah, so just honoring that we need to wrap up
Yep.
here shortly. Just a couple of points to make. One is, you know, the implications and the applications of this work are so vast. You know, there's so many populations, you know, activists that are putting their lives on the line to protect Pachamama and the earth, to stand up against injustice. Young people, you know, junior high school and high school, you know, imagine Jedi Warrior Training Programs for youth where kids would grow up with these skills like fully loaded as they deploy into a world that is going to have so many challenges. I just want to really speak to the profound value and wisdom of providing this kind of education
And back to the
on
question,
a wider basis.
the first about the nervous system, making the nervous system our ally instead of our enemy. You know, that, imagine if young kids today could learn that, you know, there's this, the mental health levels with all the amazing what's going on in the world, and then shifts, you know, with technology and things, just everything that's happening, that it's really, there's a lot of difficulty for young people growing up right now on many levels, looking out towards their future. And yes.
When did they declassify this? Why?
I think
7 years.
I'm not sure. I think it was in the 90s sometime.
Okay,
Thank
see you
you so
later.
much. And I think they declassified because they recognized that this is a story worth telling, and that, you know, things were evolving
It
in
was
terms
far
of,
enough. Yeah.
you know, what that program looked like in the 80s and what it would look like now. You know, there's so much more wisdom and technology and stuff that it's like game on, you know, it's like let's
Like more widely
spread and
adopted.
diffuse them. Yeah.
Yeah, there was more openness, and plus enough time had passed, whatever their, you know, this is highly classified, we can't talk about it now, but till, okay, we can open it up.
So
Okay.
just in the spirit of coming back to
Can I finish what I was
dedication.
gonna say, but
which one?
just about the nervous system?
Yeah.
Yeah. William James, who is father of modern Western psychology, he said the most important thing in education I'm paraphrasing, maybe you know the exact words, but the most is to learn how to make our nervous system our friend, our ally, you know, to befriend our nervous system rather than our enemy, rather than, and that kids need to learn that, and we all do, you know, as part of education, how to, yeah, so just, you had reminded me of that earlier.
Yeah, so just we can end in this way, and then people who need to go can go, and anybody who wants to stay with questions or catch us with questions up at Berets, if we're going to Berets, we can do that, or books are available. But
Oh, yeah, and the books is full of practice, of the practices that we taught the soldiers. So, you know, if we had more time, if this was like a weekend workshop or something, we would love, next time, you know, there's so much.
Planning the calendar already?
okay,
Because that's my dream. I would love to do, you know, go into, this is kind of an introduction and orientation to kind of over big view, big picture of the book, but to really go into that kind of practices that we did and to explore those together would be something I'd put on the agenda.
yeah. So for just a moment, just pause for a moment, just to feel what's shimmering within you now, just what has been meaningful and what we've explored together, any of the inspiration or the healing or the aspirations that have come alive for you to be able to presence peace in the midst of turbulence and chaos, and clarity in the midst of confusion, to find that special kind of courage to really show up as a blazing, open-hearted, open-minded, loving
Warrior.
spiritual warrior in the midst of whatever circumstances you find. Just whatever positive energy you find here, just let that flow from your heart out through the larger body of life into the hearts and minds and bodies and souls of all beings. And bless all of us that we too may awaken fully to our true nature and to our highest potentials, and be embodiments of this special kind of courage and this special kind of love, this special kind of wisdom that the world so deeply, deeply needs in these times and in all times. Thank you all so much. Deep bows and mahalo for your kind attention.